A million bees shut down a Tennessee highway, and at almost the same time, a much less funny story was breaking in New Mexico. The DEA is under fire after an AP investigation found agents let fentanyl shipments keep moving instead of seizing them right away. So today is shaping up like a perfect snapshot of modern government. One agency can't control a truckload of bees, another allegedly gambled with a poison that kills Americans, and meanwhile the world's major shipping lane is one bad incident away from another crisis. Good morning, and welcome back to Daily. The big through line today is trust, or more accurately, the way public trust keeps getting burned by institutions that insist everything is under control. We're starting in New Mexico, where the governor wants a criminal investigation into the DEA. Then we'll move through the latest chaos in the Strait of Hormuz, the weapons industry pashing in on Iran war stockpiles, Israeli activity in Syria and Lebanon, and a few global headlines that show how unstable the world feels right now. If you're getting value from this, hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Let's start with the headline that should make anyone in America stop and stare for a second. New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham is asking the state attorney general to investigate the DEA after an Associated Press report said federal agents allowed hundreds of thousands of fentanyl pills to continue into the street over a 2-year period while trying to build bigger trafficking cases. That is a serious accusation. It's not a paperwork dispute. It's a question of whether agents made a tactical choice that crossed a legal line and put real people in danger. According to the AP, the DEA repeatedly watched major fentanyl shipments move through New Mexico from 2023 to 2025, instead of seizing them immediately. The justification was the old familiar one: let the smaller catch go so you can get the bigger fish. That logic has been used in law enforcement forever. Sometimes it works, sometimes it gives criminals time to disappear, and sometimes it leaves deadly drugs in circulation while officials congratulate themselves for thinking strategically. This is where the story gets ugly. The DEA has spent years telling the public that fentanyl is an existential threat. Their own one pill can kill campaign is built around the idea that even a tiny amount can be fatal. So when you hear that agents allegedly let huge quantities of pills keep moving, the contradiction is obvious. Public messaging says every dose matters. Operational decisions, according to this reporting, say the opposite. Now, to be fair, the AP's coverage has a clear angle. It's investigative journalism, and like a lot of big national outlets, it tends to lean hard into the outrage frame. But even if you strip away the editorial temperature, the underlying issue remains the same. If the facts are accurate, why were dangerous drugs allowed to move through communities already drowning in overdose deaths? The governor did not mince words. She called the decision reckless and dangerous, and she wants to know whether New Mexico law was broken. That's extraordinary because state leaders usually do not go looking for a criminal review of a federal agency unless something has gone seriously sideways. There's also a broader political point here, and it's hard to miss. Americans are constantly told that the solution to every national problem is more funding, more coordination, more task forces, more interagency partnerships. But when you look closely, the machine is often just bigger, slower, and less accountable. Regular people in New Mexico are living with the consequences while the bureaucracy debates strategy. And the consequences are not abstract. New Mexico recorded a 21% spike in overdose deaths, even as national numbers went down. The AP says a whistleblower, DEA agent David Howell, helped bring attention to the issue, and that congressional staffers are now hearing from him. Senator Bernie Moreno called it a scandal of the highest order. Families who lost children to fentanyl are calling it heartbreaking. That's the part that matters most. Policy jargon disappears the second you put a name and a face on the victim. Michael Glonia, who lost his daughter to fentanyl, said it plainly. If Justice Department guidelines said to seize the drugs whenever practical, and those guidelines were ignored, that's not some philosophical debate. That's people being failed in real life. If you zoom out, this is also a reminder that border and trafficking enforcement cannot be treated like a thought experiment. A country that can't stop poison from moving through its own territory is not being nuanced, it's being negligent. Now, after a fentanyl story that is about as serious as it gets, we need a brief reset with something that sounds like a joke until you see the traffic map. A truck carrying about 1 million bees crashed on an East Tennessee interstate ramp near Knoxville, shutting down part of I-40 and forcing travelers to sit still while workers tried to manage a literal cloud of insects. No injuries were reported, which is the good news. The truck was wrecked, the ramp was closed, and the bees eventually got moved away. But in classic internet fashion, the pun economy moved faster than the cleanup crew. Local officials and even a member of Congress started joking about the buzz around town. It's funny, sure, but it also says something about how fragile transportation and logistics really are. One crash, one spill, one bad handoff, and suddenly a major route is partly out of commission. We only notice the hidden systems when they fail in public. And that takes us right into the bigger story overseas, because the same logic applies to shipping lanes, energy flows, and military escalation. When a roadway gets jammed, commuters are late. When the Strait of Hormuz gets rattled, the whole world feels it. The Strait of Hormuz is back in the news, and that should worry anybody who buys fuel, ships goods, or remembers how quickly regional conflict turns into global price shocks. Here's the basic update. The United States and Iran reached an initial agreement aimed at opening the strait and extending a fragile ceasefire tied to the wider conflict. There are also reports that some tankers have started using a new route promoted by a UN maritime agency, while Iran has threatened vessels that use paths it has not approved. Then, on Thursday, the UN's International Maritime Organization paused an evacuation effort after a vessel was struck off the coast of Oman. The details are still murky, which is exactly the kind of murkiness that makes shipping companies nervous and insurance companies jumpy. The British Maritime Office said the ship was damaged, but the crew was safe. Iranian officials warned vessels against using non-approved routes. Anonymous US officials blamed the IRGC. As usual, everybody is talking loudly while the facts lag behind. That uncertainty matters because Hormuz is not just a pin on a map. It is a pressure point for global energy, and pressure points attract both armed escalation and diplomatic theater. The latest language from Washington says the waterway will stay open and that the US and Gulf partners will keep it toll-free. Iranian officials, meanwhile, are talking about service fees, route management, and their own authority over passage. Same event, very different storylines. And then comes the part of this whole picture that feels almost too on the nose. The weapons industry is already cashing in. Lockheed Martin just got a $35 billion THAAD contract to ramp up missile interceptor production. The company says it will quadruple output over the next several years. That's on top of other contracts for Patriot interceptors and precision strike missiles. In plain English, the system that helped fight the war is now paying to replenish the system that fought the war, and taxpayers are footing the bill again. This is where a more skeptical, less scripted American instinct makes sense. If Washington wants endless overseas commitments, somebody profits, often a lot of somebodies. The public gets the speeches about security and deterrence, and the defense contractors get the contracts. The numbers are not small. The US reportedly fired a huge number of THAAD interceptors during last year's conflict with Iran, and more have been used in the current fighting. The White House is now asking Congress for roughly $70 billion more in military spending tied to the conflict, including at least $21 billion for munitions. That is real money. That is not theoretical. It is money that came from somewhere, and it always comes from the same place: taxpayers, debt, or both. There's also a dangerous cycle here. The more the US gets pulled into regional war management, the more it normalizes emergency spending, and the less anybody asks whether the policy itself is working. Refill the stockpiles, patch the hole, move on, repeat. That is not strategy. That is maintenance on a machine that keeps crashing. And while all of that is playing out, Israeli operations continue in the region. In southwest Syria, troops were reported harassing and detaining farmers and shepherds near Al-Rafid, setting up checkpoints, restricting access to farmland, and conducting opaque ground activity with little official explanation. Other reporting says homes has been destroyed in Kenitra, farmland has been seized, and residents are being pushed off land under the usual security justifications. To be blunt, the more opaque an operation is, the easier it is for governments to claim necessity and avoid accountability. That should make people nervous no matter which flag is on the uniform. The rest of today's headlines are not exactly helping the mood. In Lebanon and Gaza, the fighting and the fallout continued despite all the diplomatic language. Reporting from the region says Israeli strikes and drone activity have continued in Lebanon even after ceasefire understandings were announced. In Gaza, people are still being killed, and the humanitarian picture remains brutal. Some international coverage has gotten so ideological that it reads less like reporting and more like a legal brief with a headline attached. Then there's Syria again, where the pattern is the same: raids, detentions, demolitions, and very little transparency. Families are being told to leave, homes are being bulldozed, and local residents are left trying to figure out what security even means when it arrives with wrecking crews. Ukraine and Russia also remain locked in a war that is now coming home to Russia in a more visible way. Ukrainian drone attacks are hitting deep into Russian territory, disrupting airports, damaging refineries, and squeezing fuel supplies. Russian civilians are dealing with shortages, price spikes, and the kind of uncertainty that war planners always pretend stays far away from home. It doesn't. It never does. Meanwhile, in Venezuela, twin earthquakes struck the north of the country, killing dozens, injuring hundreds, and leaving damage so severe that officials warned the death toll could climb much higher. Rescue workers are still searching through collapsed buildings, and entire communities are trying to make sense of what's left. And there's one more story worth mentioning because it shows how much the next decade will be fought over infrastructure, not just ideology. Across Africa, governments are wrestling with who controls AI systems, data centers, cloud platforms, and the physical backbone of digital power. The real question is not whether AI arrives, it already has. The question is whether countries build local leverage or just lease their future to foreign companies with deeper pockets and better lawyers. That conversation matters everywhere, not just in Africa. Whoever owns the infrastructure owns the terms. Here's the bottom line. First, the DEA story is a major scandal if the AP reporting holds up, because allowing fentanyl to move through communities while claiming to fight overdose deaths is the kind of contradiction that destroys public trust. Second, the B truck crash is funny on the surface, but it's also another reminder that logistics are fragile, and that modern life depends on a lot of systems working at once. Third, the Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most dangerous pressure points in the world, and the more it's managed through threats, route warnings, and military posturing, the more likely everyone ends up paying for it. Fourth, defense contractors are already turning conflict into revenue, which is exactly why Americans should stay skeptical when Washington sells every new war as a clean necessity. And finally, from Syria to Ukraine to Venezuela, the world is still running on a lot of broken assumptions about stability. If you want more daily coverage that cuts through the noise and keeps an eye on what actually affects ordinary people, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment with the story you think mattered most today. And if you think the DEA story deserves a deeper follow-up, say that too, because that is the kind of question no agency should be allowed to shrug off.